we've got one of Australia's leading startup superstars, RedBubble, Martin Hosking here tonight, gave up his time, come talk to us. Let's do it for real for Martin, please, come on. All right, very good. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, yeah, so I think last time, must have been years ago, you were kind enough to join us on stage. Yeah. Got bigger and better.
Yeah, bigger and better, yeah.
That was my Lamborghini at the front.
Was it?
No. Thank you for coming. And a lot's happened since we last spoke. You had the listed on the ASX, lots of things happening. But for people that aren't familiar with RedBubble, can we go back a little bit? I'm going to go back as far as asking what your background was. Yeah.
I'm getting good at this because I've been doing investor relations things, and so you do a roadshow, and so you have to say the same thing time after time.
I'll mix it up. We're going to throw random shit in there.
Okay, good. Difficult questions.
Yeah.
My background, I started my career in foreign affairs and trade. I studied at Melbourne University, did history and economics down there, and came straight out of university and went to foreign affairs and trade. Spent about 7 years in foreign affairs and trade overseas, 5 years overseas as a diplomat. Came back and then did an MBA, a few years at McKinsey, and then got involved in the internet right back in 1995. So I was I can remember Netscape, the browser, just as it was really almost at the point it was launching. So I got involved very early on in the internet, and that's what I've been doing for the last 22 years. And so we started. So I was involved with a company called LookSmart, one of the early success stories is on the internet, at least from an investor point of view, not so successful from a customer point of view, but that was the internet 1.0, and then I got in, came back to Australia in 2000, a bit of 2001, was then in 2004 or 5, Aconex was leading around, and I was the largest investor in the second round of Aconex, and became, with the Gandel Group, and became chairman of Aconex in 2004, and was the chairman of Aconex from, people familiar with Aconex, I'm sure, very successful $1.1 billion Australian tech company. It's sort of a SaaS player doing collaboration for construction and engineering projects globally. It's one of the real success stories on the internet for Australia Tech. And then so I was chairman of that through from to 2010. We started RedBubble in 2006, and then we listed it on the ASX last year. Sort of run rate revenues of about 200 million now. So it's a fairly,
Good, we're all done now.
Yeah, we're all done. Exactly. Yeah.
Can you go back? Tell me about LookSmart days and some of your earlier projects. And,
So LookSmart was the best of times and the worst of times, to quote Charles Dickens or misquote Charles Dickens. The internet then was very. The business models weren't defined. And I talk about LookSmart, we have problems often startups have problems clarifying what their value proposition was. Or is. LookSmart was much worse than that. It was like the internet was back then. You could have wandered around the corridors of LookSmart and not asked a question about what we did for our customers, but even who our customers were. And people would have had very different answers. And the reality was that our primary customer was actually the investor, which is the worst of all possible answers, because the investors are just sort of very fickle beings, and it means that you're driving your strategy from the point of view of investor relations, and that's just like completely the wrong way of going about doing it, I can tell you that. It's a bit of an easy temptation as a startup to get dragged along into that, but really avoid it. And so we didn't have any clarity about who our customer was and what we were doing for them. And from that, you then just have your strategy becomes as coherent a PowerPoint deck as you can possibly put together, and a lot of hand waving and hoping and praying that you can confuse people enough that they think that they're dumb, not you.
Right. So moving forward what was the next role? Aconex?
Aconex, yeah.
And obviously you wanted to change things and be a little bit more structured there.
Yeah, well, see, what really attracted me about Aconex was, and this was really from the very start, is so the founders there, so Lee Jasper was out of McKinsey, and then Rob Philpott. But Rob had been doing a lot of work with, he was actually, his background was as an engineer, but he's doing a lot of project management. So he was really deeply embedded in the industry, and he really understood what the issues were. And they had, not the very first iteration, but by the time I got involved, they would get pretty clear about what their value proposition was and what the customers wanted from them. And I did the sort of, if you're doing due diligence in the company, I did the sort of the simplest due diligence, which is just talk to your customers. I talked to the customers and asked them, would they pay more for the service? And the answer is that yes, you're probably on a winner. So I did that, and I was really, and throughout it, it evolved, and clearly these things are always a bit squishy, you know, they're not absolutely hard-edged as you get started, and it's a bit squishy about, is this, you know, who's a real customer and exactly, but they were in the right sort of ballpark, and so at least they were playing the right game about understanding what the thing is that they were trying to deliver, and that was the reason why I decided to invest in them, even though, and that if you're in doing that, all the other sins can be forgiven. You can make technological mistakes, you can make governance mistakes, you can make any other sorts of mistakes if you've got in the right ballpark with your customers. So yeah.
So, you know, you got foreign affairs, McKinsey background, you know, a lot of this corporate kind of feel to where does empowering artists come into play and the RedBubble story?
Well, that was my original background. So, like a lot of folks, the degree I was officially getting wasn't the degree I was really getting at university. The degree I was really getting at university was a degree I was actually very heavily involved in the theatre, and you know, put on shows down off campus down here. And so I was very interested in the whole artistic. And I was talking to a RedBubble employee today, and both of us were confessing that we're completely failed artists. Like, you know, I mean, really, really, really hopeless. And I'm really, really hopeless. And it's all like, but it's the problem is it's like being a fat ballerina or something. You don't want to admit it. You know? And so I didn't want to admit it for years, and I still don't really. So
that's all right.
I'm just waiting for the right artistic movement to come along. Then I can participate. So anyway, that was where it came from. Yeah.
I saw a guy painting on Excel the other day, so I think
it's possible. Yeah.
So did you see this need for, like, you know, there's a lot of creative people in Melbourne, a lot of creative businesses you felt compelled to, you know, fill, or how did RedBubble come about?
Yeah, well, so my co-founders, Peter Stiles and Paul Vanzello are co-founders, and I think in that early days, Paul Vanzello, he's a designer, and he has a design studio, and we developed this site, a concept for a site, and it was really about, you know, allowing personalisation. And in this instance, it's, you know, like printing a photograph of yourself and putting it on a mug and giving it to your girlfriend. That's personalisation. And we developed this concept, and we were sitting around a room, and we realised it was a really, really terrible idea. Like, none of us would use it. And I just never wanted to go through that experience again of creating something for somebody else other than ourselves. And so we thought at that stage, well, given how terrible this idea is, but we liked the technology, and it was that way. We said, well, let's use exactly that same technology, but develop a marketplace for independent artists. And that then was being very much guided. And then as we said that, there's sort of like, there was all these designers and folks, and said, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. And so it came out of that exposure to the designers who we were working with, and actually ended up building the product for, you know, in a sense, well, we built it for ourselves, really, actually, which is actually a really good way to start. You know, I know a few folks in the room who built products for themselves. Yeah.
And then if I got the story right, you managed to raise quite a significant amount of money. Just on the concept?
Yeah, on the business plan. So we're lucky, because LookSmart, while it had been, as a customer proposition, had been pretty ordinary, and that's giving a bit more on, had failed. It had succeeded, at least for some investors, and who managed to get out before the roof came collapsing in. And so those investors, you know, as in all investors, so they were just sort of a bit grateful, really. You know, they'd made a fortune, and a small fortune. Well, in some cases a large fortune, and in that instance, so I just went around the hat and I said, look, you've all made some money with some of the work I've done. Give me some money. And they said
It
yes.
worked.
And they said yes. It was basically on the credibility, I suppose, and the fact that they felt grateful or guilty or something. So we raised $2 million on the business plan. Yeah.
Which doesn't often happen.
Doesn't often happen. It needs to happen a little bit more in Australia because it was a good business plan. Like it was a good business plan. It wasn't sort of like cobbled together. And we already had a good team there. And the problem with not raising enough money is that the things don't get traction. And particularly with marketplaces, is that there's a period of time where it's just the thing is going to be spinning. And all marketplaces, they won't get traction unless you have enough capital behind them. And so I think it's actually some businesses just simply fail, not because the idea is bad, but because they just didn't get enough capital to really get it going. And in some ways that's better to fail, don't raise the capital or raise enough capital to succeed, but don't get caught in the middle where you haven't raised enough capital at all. That's tricky, yeah.
Well, you touched on the marketplace bit and this, this scenario of the chicken or the egg or focusing. What was your strategy in attacking the marketplace?
Yeah, and you have to. There's different strategies with marketplaces. My guess is there's a few people doing marketplaces around the room. It's one of the things which.
Anyone doing marketplaces?
Anybody doing marketplaces? Yeah, a few. Yeah, and so you all know this is pretty familiar territory to you. The problem with marketplaces is that you don't have any sellers and you don't have any buyers, you don't have any buyers and you don't have any sellers, and you need a way of breaking through that. And it takes time and it takes some product which will work, something at least a minimum viable product. But then you need to work out which side of the marketplace you're going to go after and how you're going to get some basic liquidity in the marketplace. So the way in which we were able to solve that problem was the artists were incredibly tolerant of marketplace failure. So they were prepared to come along and participate in the marketplace and put things up for sale, even though they weren't selling. And we sort of really actively nurtured that. So RedBubble, if you go to it now, looks like a pretty active liquid marketplace, which is what it is. But early on, it was actually really very heavily community oriented and much more so than it is now. And we've got, we'd be celebrating literally people getting married who'd met on RedBubble, and stuff like that. It was like really, and there'll be meetups and where people get together and go and do photo shoots and all of this stuff. And there's still people on RedBubble who think about it primarily as this sort of, an alternative to Facebook. And we sort of and back then we could do that because Facebook wasn't really nearly as big as it is now, and we could actually just have a sort of a community, and that allowed even though we had a lot of images, it took a while before that. Then we started getting sales. So yeah.
Do you think Melbourne as a location helped, given we're such a creative city?
No.
Okay, good. Glad City of Melbourne come tonight.
No, I don't think it made much difference really. I think that the only thing which being in Australia helps with is that there's a few things which it help with. So it's not the only thing, but one thing it helps you with is you tend to want to go global fairly quickly, and that was really helpful. So you tend to build things in the right way, so you don't have this really big disconnect when you start to go global. You will typically engineer things from the get-go. If you don't, you've got a problem. But so many Australian companies have done that well. I think of Canva and Envato as well, and 99 Designs, all of which were engineered well because they had to be global, and we thought about that early, and so that was helpful. Yeah.
Can you talk through some of the pain points in growing the business? If I remember correctly, there was a truckload of T-shirts that went missing or something like that. There's some stories like that.
Yeah, so we're entering our Christmas period now, and it's sort of like, it's a bit hard to imagine, but we could sell 100,000 of a single item on one of the smaller items on a day. It's the volumes are really, really huge, and they're all coming out of these fulfillment centres all over the world. And it's it's sort of, I think back, so the first 3 years, the first 3 Christmases, the first Christmas we had we couldn't actually sell anything because Christmas came along. We only discovered Christmas was going to come in about September or November, and then we realised, oh, Christmas is going to come, we better do something. And we were doing to go selling T-shirts, and our T-shirt supplier in the US hadn't told us that they were going on holidays that year. So the first Christmas we couldn't sell anything. The second Christmas we didn't want to sell anything because we were manufacturing in Germany, and because we've got a different manufacturer who didn't go on holidays, the Germans, at least at Christmas time. But every single product we sold, we lost money on. We had negative margins. And you can survive lots of things from an economic point of view, but you don't want to be losing more money for the more things you sell, at least in the modern economics, which was not operating during the dot-com boom.
Was this from McKinsey, this kind of stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's hard to work out, I know. But that was bad because the German mark, the euro had gone against us. And in the third year, we could sell. We actually had a manufacturer, and we wanted to sell. But then we were manufacturing now the suppliers were manufacturing in the Midwest, and we had a truck of entire, because they didn't have enough supply, so we had to buy them a truck of T-shirts, and it literally disappeared off the face of the earth. We did find it eventually, but we sent somebody to America to go around and find our truck of T-shirts because it had to get found so that we could go to the supplier so it could deliver. And then fourth year we actually had somebody burn down. This year things can burn down, things can get lost because there's enough redundancy in the network. But those are the fun things of early startups. Yeah, Christmas it lost some of its magic for me during those years.
Can you talk about scaling the business and we talk about these guys and the wonderful culture at Vino Mofo, and RedBubble similarly has this great culture. Can you talk about how you scale and how you keep that essence alive, and what some of your secrets have been?
Yeah, I think scaling culture is an interesting one because inevitably it changes, and I think that I think it's about thinking about stages of life as well. You don't want to be 25 when you're 12, and you don't want to be and you don't want to be an adolescent when you're 25, and when you're 40 you don't want to be either 12 or 25. You want to be what the right stage is, and I think that the challenge with startups is getting that right. And there's a wonderful energy of an early stage startup, and you don't want to lose that, and you don't want to impose, a layers of systems and procedures. But after you get to 20 or 30 people, you're going to in a different stage. So you don't want to, how do you keep what was important about that then, but also recognise that things have changed, and you do have to make those changes. You've got to be sort of stage appropriate. We all know the sort of, the people who don't grow up. And if they survive the car accidents and stuff, they still remain, adolescents, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So for us, it's always about extracting the best of each stage of the company, but recognising that things are changing. And so, and people typically, they do, there's often a bit of resentment which comes in here as well, because you're an early stage company and you've just joined the startup, and you speak to the CEO and they say, what title do you want? And they say, well, I want to be Senior Vice President, Global Logistics, Fulfillment and Finance. And you say, fine. That's good. That's like a great title. You don't care, I want to be whatever. And you sprinkle titles around like confetti. But then you do realise at some point you actually do need somebody who's head of logistics and somebody who's head of finance who've got some skills, other than the fact that they're desperate enough to want to join you. And so you do have these sort of awkward adjustments, and a lot of people, and you do lose a lot of people along as you go through those adjustments, and then you get resentments and all of that sort of stuff. But I think the worst thing to do is not to make those adjustments, just try and pretend that you're 12 when you're actually now not 12. And so those, or 6. And so each of those stages are important. For us, the continuous thread was a real commitment to the mission of the company. So we recruit for that. We have a core part of that. And I think when you think about culture, there's been a fair bit of work which is done, about culture being something which you have to be careful about, but not in the way in which it's often been talked about. You don't want to recruit from monoculture. And a lot of Silicon Valley firms, they say, oh, we've got a great culture. We've got all of these bros who work 24 hours a day or 12 hours, 14 hours a day. And they get in the office and all that, that's what they have. They have a really, and some of the toxic cultures which have emerged there are pretty legion. I think but you want to recognise what are the continuous elements of your culture and preserve those, but it has to allow for significant diversity in the culture because that's actually where its strengths come. And for us, the real core of that was, recruit for mission and be pretty flexible about everything else.
Right, and then, so moving forward, so RedBubble, right? So you're empowering artists. Tell me some of the great stories that you found, like, because I'm on RedBubble now. You never promote my shit, by the way, but
is it good?
It's good, man. It's good.
Okay.
I'll link it. I'll send you a link.
Okay,
link. But,
okay, good.
But yeah, tell me some of the success stories or some of the stories that just keep you like, we have these low points as entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
What are some of the highlights?
Well, there's a real highlight right now. It's a pretty visible highlight. Has anybody walked down Swanston Street and seen RedBubble has done this project with the State Library? So the State Library and we worked together, and they had their collection of things and their collection of books and images, and they said, well, let's see whether we can engage with an artistic community and pick some winners. So they had 3 themes which they wanted to work on. We worked with our artists and we promoted this, and they had 2,000 entries. They had 100,000 views, 100,000 visits to the landing page, and then the winner of it is on a banner on the front page of the State Library. I tell you, she's actually a lawyer, employment lawyer. But I tell you what, I think it's been the most thrilling thing which has happened to her for a while is to see this, whatever it is, 30 metre by 15 metre high banner with her stuff on it. So that's a real highlight. That's a real buzz seeing that sort of stuff. You have the sort of on a pretty regular basis. You have the artists posting about I got my cheque for $100 that made a difference whether I could do X, Y, or Z. I could go out for dinner because I got that cheque in time. So those things are always an important part of it. And then just the the validation. So I've got a few of my favourite artists who I've been in contact with for 10 years, and you're seeing their careers develop, and then you'll talk about what it's mean to be able to sell to a global audience, and it really it's genuinely life changing for folks. So yeah, it's very empowering from that point of view. Yeah, or very makes me feel good.
Do you remember the first artist that said, "Look, I can now work on this full time thanks to you guys"?
No, I don't actually. I don't know whether I don't know somebody who said that specifically to me. But I couldn't name it. But I certainly could name artists who would talk about it. I don't know whether many artists would simply have just done RedBubble. Most are doing something else as well. So they'll be doing RedBubble, and then they'll also be selling originals, or they'll be working as a designer or something like that. But we tend to be a part of an artist's portfolio of work, and most artists are like that. They'll have a portfolio of things which they're doing rather than a single thing.
Good segue for me here. Competition.
Yep.
So you guys are one of the early pioneers, and but now there's quite a few platforms, similar kind of things happening, right?
Yeah. It's really, really hard. The marketplaces are really difficult to start, but they're really good once they get going. So people will talk to me about competition. RedBubble had 170 million visitors last year. We're doing 12, 13, 14 million visits a month at the moment. 600,000 selling artists. So it's operating at a pretty significant scale. When people mention sites, I will either not have heard of them, or they will be in a niche which we will be interested in at some point in the future. There's nobody competing at the scale which we are, and then. Typically, if you're competing against a marketplace, you decide to pick off a segment. So if you're going after Seek, you don't decide to become Australia's global employment website, you decide to do that for nurses or lawyers or something. And people typically compete with RedBubble by picking off a segment. So they say, we're going to be like RedBubble, but we're just going to sell originals, or we're going to be like RedBubble, we're just going to sell signed prints, or we're going to be like RedBubble and just do it for large format or something like that. Yeah, Has there been any acquisitions along the way? No. We've never acquired anything. No, it's all been entirely organic growth. Yeah.
There was a quote that stuck with me over the years, and it was something about RedBubble's SEO strategy. Mm-hmm. And it was something like, we just post great content all the time.
Yeah, we don't have one. Yeah, I've come to a realization that people at Google are really smart, and they're probably smarter than us, really. Or maybe they're pretty smart anyway. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to find things which the consumers want. So your best SEO strategy is to think how your customers think about things, and it's very likely Google will think about it in the same way. So it's a really tricky game to game Google. That said, you do get wins, a little bit of wins, but they're sort of, there's nobody at RedBubble whose job is SEO. There's nobody everybody's job in engineering is SEO, making sure the site's fast, it's on a good platform, the architecture's good, the information architecture is good. We did a lot of work on the information architecture, which is important. A lot of work around thinking through the linkaging strategy, but this is all designed to make it good from a consumer experience, and Google likes that. That said, we do a good deal of work with Google directly because they've got an interest, as we do with Facebook now. They've got an interest in the problem with RedBubble is we've got say 11 million images times 68 product types times different product configurations, colors. So it's like something like 1 trillion possible pages on RedBubble, and Google will actually consume all of our capacity. They'll consume as much as they want in order to crawl the site. So we do a good deal of work with deciding what Google crawls and directing their crawler to appropriate pages and ranking our pages from Google's perspective. So we do a good deal of that. That's really directing their crawler appropriately, and we do a good deal of work on the other side on paid marketing. So we provide, it used to be 25, I think it's 25, I think it's now gone up to 40 million real-time product feeds to Google, and selecting the right ones. It's 40 million sounds like a lot, but out of 1 trillion, it's actually, we have to be pretty selective about what we send to Google.
How does innovation work at RedBubble? And like, how do you make product decision, choices on that, choices on the next T-shirt or mug or iPhone case? How does innovation work at RedBubble?
For us, innovation is about sort of, it's a tricky one because the way in which we think about it is we think about setting broad themes and strategic directions, and so you've got 4 major themes right now, and then recognising that the innovation then happens within those themes, and so it's sort of directed innovation. But it's been a real challenge for us. Sometimes we've set the themes too big, and then sometimes we've set the themes too narrow. So we're now down to 4, which last year or the year before that we had 11, which was too many, and the year before that we probably had too few, but 4 seems to be working for us right now. And that gives pretty big teams of, say, 20 to 30 engineers, designers, product managers and data scientists, and they define the innovation within the themes which they have. So one big theme may be around search and search relevancy, and so they'll be doing a lot of work around creating innovative solutions there. The app exists within one of the big themes, and they'll be doing a lot of innovation around the way in which we recently augmented reality. We did some work around augmented reality, and that came out of the team which was working on the app came up with some of those interesting creative things around augmented reality for the iPhone 8. Yeah.
Is there a lot of talk with the consumer as well at the same time?
Oh yeah. So each of the themes has the other group of people involved is we have the different people running the focus groups, and so I think there's 3 or 4 people with RedBubble right now who just run different sorts of focus groups and quantitative research for in each of the themes. So I will say that we're probably defer a little bit more to Steve Jobs' view of the world. So at the extreme, the customers really are very innovative. They sort of know vaguely what they want, but they can help you derive
test your innovative ideas, but rarely are you going to get a staggering insight which is say we must build that, and it's inevitable because they don't know the limitations of the technology or the possibilities of the technology, and they're not in it to a level of detail. So insights will come, but really blinding innovative ideas.
Are those focus groups primarily focused on your influencers?
Or
the guys that have guys and girls that have lots of followers and.
No. You have to do them fit for purpose. So you'll have a focus group which will be about people who are brand new to the site. How do you find a site? You'll have a focus group about intense users. You'll have a focus group which will be around the artists. You'll have a focus. You have fit for purpose focus groups. You have them all depending upon what it is you're trying to build or develop.
So can you? Did you start rolling out different offices?
Yeah, so we're in Melbourne, San Francisco, and Berlin. So we've got about 110 people in Melbourne, 70 in San Francisco, 180, 20 in Berlin, and 5 somewhere else because we're at about 215 people right now.
And when did the decision come to list? And what was the thinking on ASX versus NASDAQ?
Yeah, the decision came to list because so a few drivers on it. One was employees we'd managed to eventually, as the Australian government did decide to remedy the situation with stock options and equity, so staff had equity and we needed to give a way of that having value. We had early investors who'd been in for the company for 10 years, and so a way of them getting liquidity in their stock. And then also, really importantly, it was actually the cheapest source of capital for us at the time, and that's been important. So, and then I've got a bit of an aversion to preference shares. And so this was ordinary stock on same terms as everybody else. So all of those things came together, and then the opportunity emerged to set up. We'd done a lot of work around governance. So it was about 18 months before we listed. We were doing the real work to be ready to list. So it does take about that long, and then about 6 months of serious work around the listing. It was a much bigger project than I thought it was going to be. I think it was about 3 times more work than I had anticipated.
What about the ongoing work?
Not as much actually. It's not very onerous once you're listed, but assuming you've got good governance structures in place, and so you can't list. I do know people who do list without sort of a company secretary or a risk register or an audit committee or a REM committee. You've got to list. You've got to have all of those bits in place, and if you've got all of those bits in place, and that's probably an overhead of maybe 4 or 5 people. To maintain that constantly, 3 or 4, because you've got to get audited twice a year. So, it's probably 3 or 4 people to overhead to as it remain as a listed company, I guess. If you're doing it well, you could probably do it cheaper if you don't do it well.
Yeah, well, yeah. What keeps you motivated at this stage? You've had tremendous success. You've got one of the biggest creative marketplaces. What keeps you charged up?
The thing which is, so RedBubble, we had 3 million customers last year. And I look at that and I say, okay, that sounds like a fairly large number of customers. But we're in 2 huge markets and 1 small market. So 94% of sales are outside of Australia, Europe, Canada, and the United States. And there is absolutely no reason why 30 million people shouldn't have bought from RedBubble last year. There's no, I guarantee you we have something for them. They just didn't know about it for some reason. And so, and the technology is changing in terms of the manufacturing capability. Our capacity to reach new customers is there. And that's just a really intriguing thought. 30 million customers, that actually sounds quite a lot, actually. It sounds like 10 times more than 3, and 3 sounded like a lot a few years ago. So I just find that sort of the capacity to have or the fact that we've managed to get onto a mission which is so scalably big is just intrinsically exciting.
Is that the internal number, 30 million, everybody?
No, the internal number is 10 million more than we're 10 times what we've got now. And so we typically build for about 10x. So right now we've been re-platforming the site. So we were originally built on Ruby on Rails. We've been re-platforming the site onto the React platform, which I assume people are building on. That's been 10 engineers or 12, 11 engineers for over a year. So a multi-million-dollar investment. And that's just the previous platform was fine for us. It just wasn't going to scale to 10x. Yep.
You mentioned a question that I did have in mind that I skipped. The improvements in manufacturing, right, and the I guess the print on demand and,
yep.
and what kind of an impact has that had on your business? Obviously, it went from not profitable to profitable.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't. When we launched, it was really about just wall art and paper-based products. That was all I thought was possible. And then suddenly we could do T-shirts with direct-to-garment DDG printing, and that was really exciting. And now you can do a sublimated printing, and you can do. And we're now doing manufacturing on demand. We pioneered the manufacturing on demand as an innovation. That's where you print the material and then you laser cut it and then you sew it. And there was sewing robots are definitely they're close. And so RedBubble will be moving into more high fashion items. We've got about a backlog of about 200 different products which we would like to be doing. So the possibilities are continuing to expand on that category, and that's without me with my spooky hat on and talking about 3D printing and stuff like that.
So is that just a really cool meeting with all senior management and all these really cool things that could be happening?
Oh, no, I don't make any decisions like that. No, they keep me well and truly outside of all those sorts of decisions. No, this is the people on the decisions about product types. We might make a directional intent on categories or number, but they're all made by folks who actually know things.
Yeah, not the imposters.
No, exactly. Yeah.
You touched on it, so I'm going to ask: 3D printing. How does this not affect your business when I can print a pair of shoes? Or
can you?
Not yet. Soon, right?
No. I don't think so. I doubt very much that. Does anybody? This is a really tech audience, and so there must be some. Does anybody have a 3D printer at home? 1, 2. It's very, very rare. So 3D printers are, you're not going to be printing things quickly. I was down at the CSIRO lab, and it's definitely coming along. It's worth visiting the CSIRO, got a 3D printing facility down there. And it does some things really well. Like if you happen to want your rib cage replaced, it will print you a new rib cage, it's actually quite helpful because your rib cage is pretty personal to you and you don't want somebody else's, and so that's quite good. So it does stuff like that, but it's not the cheapest rib cage you could possibly get. But you're not price sensitive at that point either. No. So it's a bit different than the mug, which takes about a day to print, but you're much more price sensitive than you are for your medical appliances. So it's sort of it's really, really cool. It's not 3D printing; it's 2D printing in layers, and it does some things really well, but they're pretty high price point and pretty specialised. But that said, it will be better, and it will come along. But it's unlikely. Shoes are a fair way off. We're not yet Star Trek Enterprise where you press the button and it comes popping out. No.
Let me ask a few questions here. I might be jumping around a bit here. What were some of the key lessons from scaling up the operations? I think we hit that. Why is Melbourne so defined by successful marketplace? This is a great question. It seems to be, I would say, we're marketplace capital.
Yeah, we've done well. I think one of the advantage of a marketplace. It depends what the marketplace is, but some marketplaces can get going off relatively low invested capital and not requiring huge. You can get, so Invato, because of the nature of that in marketplace, they could get going pretty easily. We had the advantage of the marketplace that we had negative working capital, which is a good sort of working capital, not the other sort. Even though it's got negative, it's actually positive. So we had good work. We had a positive working cash cycle, and that's typically marketplaces will often have that, and that's a really good thing. So in a capital constrained environment, marketplaces can be quite good. I think the same was true with Seek and REA and car sales to a lesser extent. So, yeah, it's interesting that there are so many have come out of here. Yeah, it is interesting.
Co-founder relationships are tricky. How have you made it work?
Yeah, co-founder relationships are really, really important. I have, as an investor, I'm pretty keen on people having co-founders because it seems to me that the fact that you have convinced at least one other person or you've convinced each other that your idea is good seems like a really positive sign. And if you can't convince one other person, it just feels funny to me. And the reality is that it's a pretty lonely, early stage. And showing that you can work with a group of people, a small group of people, and actually nobody has all the skill sets that a startup requires. So I think co-founder relationships are actually really quite important, and particularly, and the most common combination is one really technical person and one not really technical person, and they're pretty rare. The Bill Gateses of the world who can be both really, really, really technical and really, really strong business people. But even Bill Gates had a co-founder. Michael Dell is one of the rare examples of somebody who was really pretty much on their own. But mostly really good companies have had two founders, and I think there's a good reasons for that.
How did you bring it back to your own story? How did you stay sane with your co-founder?
You fight a lot, really. Yeah, you do. I think they are. You do. They're pretty intense. And I think you have to have that if it's going to work. I don't know how married couples do it. Actually, I just don't know, because often there are married founder relationships, and I just don't know how they'd survive. Maybe they don't, because it is, like you want to go after you've sort of threatened to kill the person, and making really difficult decisions. And it's sort of Sophie's choice often as a startup. Which baby do you kill? Are we going to do PR? Are we going to do public relations? Or are we going to launch a feature on the website? You should be doing both, of course, and you have to decide which child is going to go. Is going to be saved and which one's not, and you will have a difference of opinion there, and those opinions will be equally valid and equally based in, and you won't often have the fact base to make that decision, so it does end up as a drinking competition or paper, scissors, rock or something, in order to make those calls. But I think that those are really good dialogues to have anyway. I think they're really good dialogues to have. So you have to have, I think, a tolerance, and you have to, at some level, you have to sort of genuinely like and respect each other as well. That certainly helps.
Sorry. So you touched on the. Can we just switch modes for a second? I'll get back to these questions on Martin Hosking, the investor.
Yeah.
We've got a group of entrepreneurs here. Obviously, everyone wants cash. What are you looking for in investment?
I don't do any more. So I decided I just didn't have time to do due diligence. So I'm an LP in Blackbird Capital, and if you come to me with a business card and say, could you invest in this, I'm going to say I can pass it along to Blackbird, and if they can do all the hard work, and I'll pick up some of the scraps because I'm an LP in Blackbird. So I don't do it. But if I was, one other thing when I have done it. The few times I've done it have been really about looking. I like the founders' relationships. I like the nature of real clarity, some clarity about who your customers are and what you're actually doing for them. And then I like the fact that there's somehow that the business model can have some scalable economics. I think it's I'll just give you a little insight. I think it's really, really difficult in Australia to launch a business which requires huge scale in order to be profitable. So I think it's very hard to get a Facebook funded here in Australia because of the challenges of getting to that sort of scale. So I think we tend to have businesses which scale a little bit more. Revenue comes in, you can scale it like Atlassian and Varto and RedBubble, all of which had revenues trickling in from relatively early on.
That covers. And then, all right, go back to these questions. Don't harass Martin for money.
Well, you can harass me, but you know what the answer will be. Go to Blackbird.
Well, that's it. We've got none coming up here. Who's on? I'll go for a couple of questions in the audience. Here we go.
There's a question on manufacturing China being so...
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Manufacturing in China. No, we see our customer value proposition is really about speed to market, speed to customer. So our average shipping time right now is under 4 days from when you order, and we can only do that because we manufacture locally. And I like it. I like the fact that people, our partners in Brisbane, Horsham, down the road here, Dandenong, that's manufacturing coming back. It's good. We need those sorts of jobs. We just can't be all sort of, elite programmers. We actually need people doing real stuff as well, hopefully.
Love that. Any more questions? Take one more from the audience.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Could you talk about the work-life balance throughout the stages of the startup?
Yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Like, you see this stuff coming out of Silicon Valley where it's all about, working 14 hours a day and sort of 6 or 7 days a week. And Steve Jobs promoted it and other companies have promoted it and they've sort of got on the bandwagon as if somehow that is my ingredient or necessary ingredient for success. That worries me as a sort of a model, because if that's the only way in which you can be successful is by that sort of effort, then it just sort of, there seems to me something a bit fragile in your business model. And I think it's really, really hard for anybody in a seriously intellectual job to be working really long hours for long periods of time. I think programming, for example, I reckon, I can do it for about, when I could do it, I can't do it anymore. But I just don't think you can do that for 12 hours a day. I just don't think it's possible to do it. Well, some people can do it, but most of the world can't. And so I think work-life balance in that sense is just about being reasonable about what the expectations of people are. And then I think that the one bit of it which is a bit interesting is that you tend to get really wrapped up in the early stages of your startup and you just do it because you're enjoying it. Like you might be answering customer service queries or something like that at night, and that's all fine, but I do think it's about, right now I'm pretty brutal. I don't answer any emails on the weekend and I don't send any emails on the weekend. I don't expect people to respond on weekends. And we've introduced this, and this has been very helpful. We've introduced it to our Silicon Valley office about being pretty clear that we don't expect people to be on call, 24 hours a day. That we expect people to have lives, and you're only going to be sustainable. People are going to have children and babies and bigger children and older parents and older dying parents and all of that stuff of life and relationships and stuff. And I think that if you don't allow for that, then you're just going to have people there for relatively short periods of time and then they're not going to leave. And so I'm really pleased with the fact that people stay at RedBubble for years and years and years and go through all of the stages of life rather than that Silicon Valley mindset of it's a real project-based view of the world. Like, what project are you working on tends to be, rather than what company, what project. I'm going to do it for 2 or 3 years, really, really hard, and then get on to the next project. And I just find that all a little bit too churny and unsustainable.
Was it something that you can relate to personally? Was there a time when you drew the line at, I'm going to do damage to myself physically if I'm going to keep working this hard, or was there any? Oh no, I've always been fairly lazy.
No, I've never. Yeah, I've never been really, really hard worker. There's times when I've worked, on occasion, I've worked through, multiple weekends, but not for long periods of time. And only when absolutely pressed. I've never thought that that's necessary. I like walking and thinking and meditating and wonder and trying not to do things. Because the other thing is, if you're working really hard, it often means 60% of the stuff you don't need to do, or you should be delegating, or they should be I reckon it can be a bit. This is the wrong thing to say.
No.
Oh God! I'm just creating a generation.
No, I think it's great. I think it's great. Yeah, I think it's refreshing.
Yeah. So anyway, there's periods where I've worked hard, but I can't. And there are periods of time where it's been very, very stressful, extremely stressful, but not typically because I've felt like I've overworked myself or working myself to death. No.
Do you think that's a matter of having smart people around you that you trust to just get the other shit done?
No, I think everybody should be the same way. I think that the biggest thing, that one advantage which Melbourne does have, and this is the advantage of, the reason why Berkshire Hathaway and Buffett is in Iowa, and being in Melbourne's their version of Iowa. He says respectfully and carefully to both Iowa and to Melbourne. But the point about it is it's a long way from that, the intensity.
I lived in Des Moines for 3 years. No bullshit.
It's a long way from Silicon Valley. And one of the issues there is that it's a lot of jumping on to the next thing. Like when apps launched, everybody had to have their app. We took 3 years without developing an app, and then we decided, okay, because we said it's a responsive website, let's be careful about this stuff, and that gives you that time not to do a lot of the stuff which you can get really fixated on doing unnecessarily, and so doing less is often quite a good discipline, and we're putting that through the organisation to think about doing the right things rather than more things is actually quite helpful.
I love that. I want everyone back on their feet, and I'm going to give a big thank you to Martin for coming. There we go, early one. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.